Secondly, we're in a situation where we have put together, and you guys did it for our administration, the President Obama's administration before this. We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics. Secondly,
well, at least he's being honest about this. And I should say that a lot of you have noticed that I've mostly stayed out of this election cycle, only talking mostly about things like the bureaucracy or the swamp, corporate media conglomerates, the corporate media, as well as big tech and censorship, as well as Trump's lack of doing anything to counter it, and allowing his entire online support base to be deplatformed and censored en masse. Now it's election plus one. Trump's social media, his own social media, now carries as many warnings as a containment box for plutonium. And none of the alleged malfeasance in this election and any of the groups that are involved should surprise anyone. Now, I've spoken at length about the false right-left paradigm and the nonsense idea that it's the American people that choose their presidents. And I've maintained for a long time that it's illusion. It's an illusion of choice, cycle after cycle after cycle. And it is the same groups that continue to rule that nation. Who those groups are, you can take a look at my back catalog and orient yourself. But put simply, using the example of Spengler's civilizational model, this election is occurring dramatically late in the life cycle of Western civilization. And what we're going to do in this video is go through some of the more blatant examples that occurred over the last 24 to 48 hours, which would make the death of Jeffrey Epstein look subtle in its subterfuge by comparison. And maybe it's time for people to understand that this election is proof positive of the fact that the United States is clearly now a banana republic, and that people should stop feeding that machine. Maybe it's time to pull the life support machine on this whole rotten phenomenon and focus on new beginnings. Okay, and what we're going to start doing is looking at some of the blatant fraud that is going on in this election in 2020. And I'm going to just show you some of the more interesting ones I found on my Twitter timeline just after I woke up just a couple hours ago. Well, this one was quite interesting. It was by a man who had already done hand ballot recounts in New York, and he said that the vertical lines in Michigan and Wisconsin are not statistically improbable, they're outright impossible. And these are the vertical lines in votes for Joe Biden in Wisconsin. That was, at the time, had a comfortable lead by Mr. Trump, but then has been called since for Mr. Biden, and the same goes for Michigan. Wow, what a surprise. The next one is, again, in Wisconsin and Michigan. And basically, votes cast in Wisconsin had increased by 16%, in Michigan by 15%, and the overall number of votes cast was increased by 7%. And this was happening in Rust Belt states that had stagnating populations, but somehow their total number of votes by more than double the average for the U.S. as a whole. The next one was other anomalies on how Mr. Biden keeps on adding extras. Excuse me, that's my pigeon. He keeps on adding extra 100,000 votes out of urban areas in swing states that are not voting at all in the Senate race. And this is an anomaly. Generally, we don't see in neighboring states. Almost as if 100,000 swing state voters just voted for Biden, but no one else. Nobody in the Senate. Wow. Quite interesting. And then another one, 23,277 votes in Philadelphia, all for Biden. All for Biden. The odds of this happening are somewhere below 0%. This is a very interesting one. And this is talking about Antrim County. And this is again in Michigan, I believe. And it takes a look at the county and their votes and the percentage of votes that the candidates in 2016 received. And as you can see, in 2016, Donald J. Trump received 62% of this county's vote, whereas Hillary Clinton received 32.5%. Now take a look at it now. It's absolutely inverted for the 2020 contest between Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump. Doesn't seem very likely that that is accurate. Another one that I found quite interesting is from the Milwaukee City Wire, and it was an analysis that 7 Milwaukee wards report more 2020 presidential votes than registered voters. And Biden netted 146,000 votes in the city to clinch that state. Now, what's even more interesting is this character here, Mr. David Schaefer. And David Schaefer is just so you know, he's the chairman of the Georgia Republican Party. And he has some pretty interesting tweets over the last 8 hours. And basically, the one that caught my eye was that Fulton County told our observers, GOP observers, to go home last night because they were closing up. But then they continued to count ballots in secret. And he has a whole plethora of very interesting tweets on malfeasance, electoral malfeasance, and I'll leave a link to his Twitter in the description of this video. This is a one that I really liked, straight from Fox 2 in Michigan, that there were 4,788 duplicate registrations that they were able to find. That there were 32,519 more registered voters than eligible voters. And that there were 2,503 dead people registered. One of these voters was born in 1823. And this is from Detroit's Fox 2 in Michigan. What a surprise. What a coincidence. This is another very interesting one. In Milwaukee, which we were talking about just previously, that by state law, absentee ballots must be delivered to their location where they will be counted by 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have Matt Smith here. Milwaukee's 169,000 plus absentee ballots en route to county election officials. But interestingly, he took that picture at 4:06 a.m. the next day. What a coincidence! There's just all these coincidences. It just seems quite shocking that there's so many coincidences. This is another very interesting one, is that everyone with a GOP badge was thrown out of the room that was counting votes in Detroit. And they were still counting with only Democrats in the room, with police and are barricading and supporting this. Video below is people here saying, stop the count.
Stop the count! Stop the count! Stop the count! Stop the count! Stop the count!
It's almost as if people think that their vote is being not counted, or their votes are being suppressed, or there's voter fraud going on. How could these people believe this in such a great and honest democracy like the United States? How is this even possible? This one is even more interesting. And it's a video. Suitcases and coolers are being rolled into the Detroit voting center at 4 a.m. And they're brought into secure count. Excuse me. They're being brought into the secure counting area. I'm still actually very tired because I was up almost all day yesterday watching this stuff. And there is a video here. You can see it on YouTube. I'll try to leave links to all of this sort of stuff in the description. As you can see, put this on a little bit faster so you don't, not to bore you.
Looks like one of those lock boxes.
Or maybe as you can see, it's a wagon right there with a kind of lockbox, as the lady said. And this is outside the Detroit Voting Counting Center, the one where anyone that was a Republican was thrown out of. And votes were being tabulated only with Democrats. And you can see the wagon here is being pulled into the voting counting center at 4 a.m. in the morning. And I'll just speed it up.
Places were closed.
And supposedly, exactly the lady just said, these places are closed. You can see that wagon being brought in. You can see pictures here as well as other wagons and suitcases being brought in. What a coincidence! This is becoming almost Dame Pesos in its what a coincidence. Let's see. Another one here that's quite interesting is that this was taken by a lady who was inside the Detroit yet again. This was a state that has been handed over to Mr. Biden just a couple of hours ago. And as you can see, GOP attorneys are being escorted out, and every time they are, the people supposedly monitoring and the people counting votes are applauding. What a clean election. What a fair election. And this lady here, this black lady, this corpulent black lady here, she's telling the woman taking videos that she's not allowed to be taking videos. And there's more videos. Again, people clapping, people cheering, telling her you can't take videos. And here's another one of this same lady. Quite interesting. Now, some questions that you have to start asking yourself are we supposed to believe that Wisconsin's turnout was 90%? That Atlanta's vote count was delayed because of a broken pipe? That Green Bay vote count was delayed because they ran out of ink? Batches of tens of thousands of votes are coming in 100% for Biden in Pennsylvania? I don't know. It's up to you to believe or what you want to believe, because to say anything otherwise is to risk having your voice silenced by big tech. And again, because Trump did nothing to protect anyone that would actually speak on his behalf. What's funny is that when you take a look at the media's coverage of the people in Detroit that are unhappy with what they see as voter fraud, let's take a look at what the media has to say about that.
Heidi, you have some news on the ground there at that counting facility. What is actually happening behind you?
Yeah, Eamon, behind me is Detroit's TCF Center. This is where poll watchers are racing to try and count all the votes outstanding here in Wayne County. But what we see here is essentially an increasing mob-like scene of self-proclaimed poll watchers who say that they want to get access to the building. So many of them have rushed into the building here that I'm actually talking to official Democratic poll watchers from the Democratic Party who've been shut outside of the balloting room.
So, they have people that are very concerned about the voting process and the counting of it, of everyone's votes. And what do you have? You have the local MSNBC news media calling these people a mob, as you can see, milling around with no placards. I don't see any fires. I don't see any masks. I see no projectiles. I see nothing but what looks to be, for the most part, middle-aged people milling around that are demanding access to a building where they believe basically the election's theft is taking place. And this is in stark contrast to over in Wisconsin just a few months ago, where the media, well, let's hear what they had to say about cities being burnt to the ground and looted.
What you're seeing behind me is one of multiple locations that have been burning in Kenosha, Wisconsin over the course of the night. A second night since Jacob Blake was seen shot in the back 7 times by a police officer. And what you are seeing now, these images came and come in stark contrast to what we saw over the course of the daytime hours in Kenosha and into the early evening, which were largely peaceful demonstrations in the face of law enforcement. It wasn't until night fell that things began to get a little bit more contentious. Things were thrown back and forth. Police started using some of those crowd dispersal tactics like tear gas, even playing very loud sounds to push them out. And then what you are seeing, the common theme that ties all of this together, is an expression of anger and frustration over what people feel like has become an all too familiar story playing out in places from across the country, not just here in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Christine, Laura.
All right, thank you so much for that. New overnight, a potential coronavirus.
Fiery but peaceful. A city being looted, a city being ransacked, is a fiery but peaceful protest where middle-aged people standing outside, milling about, asking for entrance to view the voting and the counts of those votes, being called a mob. It's funny how this seems to work. And part of this debacle can be squarely placed on not only the media that has been attacking the president for 4 years, but also social media. And in particular, it's quite interesting how Twitter and its complete censorship that has been going on, deplatforming, shadow banning, and silencing of anyone that is at all supportive of the president. Well, the New York Times is now bragging. The New York Times is now bragging that Twitter's election night censorship has basically helped Mr. Biden win the presidency. And it's quite interesting. They use, well, obviously, almost all of his tweets at this point are now labeled with some kind of warning. But there was a chart that I saw. Where was it? Yeah, so for example here, the Times notes that an analysis shows Trump's posts was shared or replied to about 827 times a minute after it was labeled with one of their warnings. So they slap a warning on it. That dropped to 151 times a minute. So what you have now is the New York Times, legacy media, applauding big tech in their censorship, and they're taking away of voices from the American people in an election cycle. And this is not only for the president himself. This is a Derek Duck, who I've been following over the past few days, and who did contact me a couple of times. Well, his Twitter account was banned for documenting election irregularities. And none of this is particularly surprising. James Woods here notes that if you even question this, if you even question that it's true, Twitter blocks you. Voting by mail is legal and safe, experts and data confirm. But what I would like to stress is that Trump did nothing to stop this. He did nothing to stop the tech censorship and deplatforming over the past 4 years. And as a result, there was virtually little to nothing in terms of internet momentum for his campaign, the way that there was in 2016. There were meme accounts that were banned over on Instagram. Pretty much the entirety of the 2016 group of conservative individuals that were for Trump have been deplatformed. And now the tech companies know that there is nothing to stop them. And the censorship in America and globally is only going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And I have to say, this is one of the legacies that has to be laid at the foot of the Trump administration for his lack of action and his constant monitoring of the situation. Now, one other good question that I would like to have answered, and I think a lot of other people would like to have answered, is that large states like California, Florida, New York are able to quickly tabulate their election results. So why is it that the swing states that were at the time trending toward Trump, the several swing states, all that have Democratic governors, I should add, except for one, a rhino governor, why is it so difficult for these states to tabulate their votes? Is this not inherently suspicious? I mean, what do you think? Now, the people that are overseeing the elections in the two key swing states that have just gone over to the Democratic camp and Mr. Biden, Wisconsin and Michigan. Well, the overseer, not Wisconsin and Michigan, the overseer of Pennsylvania and Michigan. This is the overseer of the Pennsylvania election. And she has tweeted back in 2017 that using the title of president before the word Trump really demeans the office of the presidency. And this is the woman overseeing the election in Pennsylvania. And this woman here, Jocelyn Benson, she's the Michigan Secretary of State, and she's the one overseeing the election in Michigan, which was key to Trump's presidential re-election aspirations. She is a woman that was educated at Oxford, and she conducted her research into white supremacy, neo-Nazism, and then worked for the Southern Poverty Law Center as an investigative journalist into these same topics, and also worked for the NAACP, which I would say is probably a little bit of a better organization than the SPLC. But these are organizations that continually attempt to paint Trump as something that he's not. And I find it very interesting that this same woman here is overseeing the ballot counting in that same center in Detroit, where now, I'll let you take a look, they're now making it so people cannot even see within the building. And this woman, the Secretary of State, Ms. Benson, who works or worked for the SPLC, is now making so that the public is not allowed to even look into the building where votes are being tabulated. Now, what I would say is I love the fact that people like Rachel Maddow and the entirety of the mainstream media spent the last 4 years conjuring this fluff piece of a Russian collusion with President Trump by purchasing $50,000 worth of Facebook ads. And that was supposedly enough election interference to hamstring an entire administration into a deep state investigation and impeachment. But shutting down voting on the same day as the votes were cast and censoring all discussion of it. Well, that's just democracy at work. And this is actually quite obvious for anyone that has eyes to see and is not as fanatically partisan as to be able to ascertain the truth. And having not said that they are beholden to the reality gap. And in 2016, the Democrats didn't think Trump could win, and they didn't prepare. This time, they saw him coming, and they took extraordinary measures. At least 6 Democrat-controlled states took defensive measures to stop and delay counting of the votes. And the complicit media is playing along. And the permanent coup within the guts of Washington, D.C. continues into the new election cycle process again and again and again. What's even more interesting is that supposedly, perhaps one of the most unexciting candidates in American history, supposedly, this man got more votes in 2020 than Barack Obama got in 2008. And if you believe that, this man got more votes than any presidential candidate in history and more than Barack Obama in 2008, I have a bridge to sell you. I absolutely do. But when looking at Trump, he didn't protect his base. He allowed the deplatforming and censorship by big tech to decimate not only his own online presence, but also that of his supporters. And he should have seen the fraud coming and worked to stymie it. This is a blow. The globalists, they've won. The U.S. will continue to decline. The U.S. will continue to fracture ever more. The tribalization will continue and gain traction. The U.S. will be brought back into many parts of the global order that Trump attempted to decouple it with. And you can be sure that a 47-year veteran of Washington will return the country back to the status quo of military interventions overseas, and the continuance of endless wars will restart promptly. China and the globalists are the big winners in all of this, not Biden. He is a puppet of this entire process. America had its first public and demonstrable banana republic election. Its newfound status, as I should say, has nothing to tell any country on this planet about democracy, elections, freedom, or transparency. To be honest, the country, because of this election, has become a global laughing stock. And I, as an American, am sorry to be the one to say this. But what I would tell you is that I think it's time to break the right-left narrative and take a look at what's really going on behind the curtain and what this means going forward. And in my next video, I will do just that on this topic. And I will be looking at the, quote, build back better, closed quote, and the Great Reset and what it means for Americans and the rest of the world. But unfortunately, you get the government you deserve. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Make sure to subscribe and give it a like if you enjoyed the content. Talk to you again soon.